Sienna looked me dead in the eye and told me my thrift store cardigan and sensible shoes were simply not classy enough for her elite country club wedding. My son Leo stared at his plate, tracing the rim of his coffee cup, completely silent. I did not cry. I did not argue or raise my voice to defend my dignity. I just nodded, picked up my purse, left the dinner tab on the table, and walked out of the restaurant. My name is Irene Caldwell. I am 64 years old, a widow for 5 years, and a retired school administrator. I live a quiet, comfortable life in a paid-off 4-bedroom house in the Chicago suburbs. Leo is my only child. Over the last 2 years, I had watched him slowly morph into an obedient, passive shadow of his fiancée, Sienna. Sienna was a woman entirely obsessed with appearances. She spent money she did not have to impress people she did not even like. When they got engaged, Leo begged me to help fund the extravagant wedding. I agreed to pay for the catering and the floral arrangements, 2 massive expenses, but I did it on my own terms. I did not hand them a blank check. I signed the contracts directly with the vendors, paying the initial deposits from my own checking account. Sienna hated that arrangement. She wanted the cash transferred directly to her so she could control it and likely spend it elsewhere. I refused. That refusal had been brewing into a silent war culminating in this dinner. She wanted me out of the wedding pictures. She wanted my money, but not my presence. As I drove home that evening, navigating the familiar suburban streets, I did not feel heartbroken. I felt a profound, crystal-clear sense of relief. The boundary had been officially crossed, and I was finally free to stop pretending. I parked it in my driveway, unlocked my front door, and walked into my kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water and opened my laptop. It was time to take action. What Sienna did not realize was that the final payments for her perfect day were due in exactly 48 hours. I opened my email and located the invoices from the caterer and the floral designer. The final balances totaled just over $22,000, scheduled to be automatically drafted from my account the week of the wedding. I picked up my phone and dialed the caterer first. I kept my voice pleasant and entirely steady. "Hello, this is Irene Caldwell. I need to cancel my financial sponsorship for the wedding this Saturday. I understand I will forfeit the deposit, but I am withdrawing my card for the remaining balance. Please contact the bride directly for the final payment." I repeated the exact same process with the florist. It was a simple administrative action. There was no drama, no screaming matches, and no drawn-out arguments. I closed my laptop, walked into my living room, and felt a heavy weight lift off my chest. The next morning, Leo stopped by my house before work. He used his spare key, walking into the kitchen while I was watering my pothos plants by the window. He looked exhausted, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Mom, about last night," he muttered, avoiding my eyes. "Sienna is just under a lot of stress. You know, her parents are inviting very important people. You can still come, just maybe sit in the back row." I set my watering can down on the counter. I looked at my son, truly seeing him for who he had become. He was not a victim. He was an active participant in his own misery, enabling her disrespect just to keep the peace in his apartment. "Leo," I replied smoothly. "Sienna made her choice, and I respect it. I will not be at the wedding. But since you are here, leave your spare key on the counter. I am having the locks rekeyed today." His head snapped up, his eyes widening. "What? Why?" "Because this is my home, and I prefer to give access only to people who actually respect me," I answered. I held out my hand. He stared at me, shocked that I was not weeping or begging for an invitation. Slowly, he reached into his pocket and handed over the key. He had absolutely no idea what was coming next. Leo left the house looking deeply confused. He was used to me being accommodating, constantly smoothing over the rough edges of his life. But at 64, my tolerance for blatant disrespect had completely evaporated. I was done being their emotional and financial punching bag. Later that afternoon, I was sorting through a stack of mail the postman had just dropped through the slot. Leo still used my address for some of his banking and tax documents, a lingering habit from his college days. Tucked between this grocery circulars and utility bills was a thick envelope from a high-yield credit card company addressed exclusively to Leo. Normally, I would just toss it into a pile on the desk for him to pick up later. But the envelope was partially torn open, caught and shredded by the postal sorting machine. Inside, I saw a bold red header printed across the top page: Final Notice Joint Account Over Limit. I did not need to dig deep or hire a private investigator. The truth was sitting right on my kitchen counter. I gently slipped the paper out. Sienna and Leo had a joint credit card, and it was maxed out at $45,000. The itemized charges were entirely luxury boutiques, high-end spa treatments, and the expensive destination bachelorette party Sienna had taken last month. Leo made a modest salary as a mid-level graphic designer. He did not have $45,000. Sienna had been draining him dry, financing her elite lifestyle on credit while demanding I pay for the wedding. I did not call him to scream. I did not rush over to their apartment to confront her. I simply folded the statement back up, placed it in a clean envelope, and wrote Leo's name on the front in black ink. I would hand it to him at the exact right moment. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text message from Sienna. Leo said, "You took your key back. Stop acting like a child. We still need you to pick up the floral centerpieces on Friday." I read the text, smiled, and deleted it. She was about to learn a very hard lesson about how money actually works when you push away the person writing the checks. Thursday arrived exactly 2 days before the wedding. I hired a local locksmith to change the front and back door locks. It cost me $150 in cash, and it was easily the best money I had spent in years. The heavy, solid click of the new brass deadbolt felt like a physical barrier between my hard-earned peace and their endless chaos. That evening, I heard a loud, aggressive knock at the front door. I checked the peephole. It was Leo and Sienna. Sienna was glaring at her phone screen while Leo looked profoundly uncomfortable, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. I opened the door just a few inches, keeping the heavy brass chain engaged. "Mom, open the door." Leo sighed, leaning against the frame. My key did not work. That is the entire point of changing the locks. "Leo," I replied evenly, not moving an inch. "Do you want?" Sienna pushed past his shoulder, shoving her phone toward the crack in the door. "I got an email from the caterer." She snapped, her voice shrill and demanding. "They said the card on file was removed for the final payment. You need to fix it right now. They want $22,000 by tomorrow morning, or they are not bringing the food." I looked right into her eyes, keeping my expression perfectly neutral. "I am not fixing anything, Sienna. You made it very clear I am not classy enough to attend your wedding. It makes perfect sense that my low-class money should not fund it either." Her jaw dropped. She gripped the door frame. "You cannot do this. We do not have the cash for that." "That sounds like a problem for the bride and groom," I said calmly. I looked past her at Leo and slipped the white envelope containing his credit card statement through the crack in the door. "Here is your mail, Leo. I suggest you open it before you stand at the altar." I shut the door firmly and slid the deadbolt home. They stood on my porch for another 10 minutes, pounding on the wood. I ignored them, walked into my living room, and turned on the television. The boundary was set, and I was not moving it. Friday passed in absolute silence. I did not receive any more visits, and my phone remained blissfully quiet. I knew exactly what was happening on their end. Frantic phone calls, maxed-out credit cards declining at the bank, and the brutal realization that the wedding vendors were entirely serious. Sienna had always believed that complaining loudly enough would force people to bend to her will. But professional vendors do not care about tantrums. They care about cleared funds. Saturday. The day of the wedding was beautiful. The sky was clear and bright, a perfect autumn afternoon. I woke up early, made myself a cup of Earl Grey tea, and sat on my back patio watching the birds. I did not feel a single shred of guilt. I had spent 2 years walking on eggshells, biting my tongue, while Sienna mocked my modest home, my practical clothes, and my quiet life. I was done absorbing their disrespect. Around noon, I drove to the local butcher. I bought a beautiful bottle of vintage Pinot Noir and a premium cut of steak. If I was not going to eat dry chicken at an overpriced country club, I was going to treat myself in my own dining room. By 4 o'clock, the ceremony was scheduled to begin. The venue was an expensive botanical garden on the affluent side of town. I knew hundreds of guests were arriving, expecting a lavish cocktail hour and a 5-course dinner. I seasoned my steak, poured my wine, and sat at my kitchen island. I did not check my phone. I did not open social media. I simply enjoyed my meal in the quiet sanctuary of my own home. But I knew a massive storm was raging miles away. Leo had taken that envelope. I knew my son well enough to know he avoids bad news. He likely had not opened it until he was forced into a corner. And today, the corner was a venue manager demanding payment. The peaceful silence in my kitchen was eventually broken by a frantic ringing from my cell phone. It was not Leo. It was Martha, my former neighbor who was attending the wedding. I let Martha's call go straight to voicemail. I had no intention of inserting myself into the disaster. 5 minutes later, she sent a text message. Irene, you need to see this right now. The wedding is completely falling apart. Turn on your phone. Everyone is recording it. Curiosity finally won. I opened a social media app on my tablet. It did not take long to find it. Several of Sienna's bridesmaids had been live streaming the event all afternoon, desperate to show off the elite aesthetic. Now their streams were capturing a spectacular, unfiltered meltdown. I tapped on a video. The camera was shaky, pointing toward the grand altar at the center of the garden. But there were no flowers, just bare wooden beams and empty pedestals. The florist had not delivered a single rose. The seated guests were murmuring loudly, turning in their chairs. Sienna was standing at the altar in her custom-imported gown, but her face was twisted in absolute, unhinged rage. Leo stood across from her holding a crumpled piece of paper. I recognized the paper instantly. It was the credit card statement I had handed him through the door. Sienna was screaming, her voice echoing harshly across the manicured garden. You promised me this was handled. Your mother was supposed to pay for this. We have 300 guests sitting here with no food. Leo did not shrink back this time. The passive, obedient boy I knew was completely gone, replaced by a man realizing he was drowning in a trap. He shook the paper violently at her. You maxed out our accounts. $45,000. Sienna. You lied to me about your debt. You banned my mother and you expected her to keep paying for your lies. The guests gasped collectively. Phones were instantly raised, recording every second of the confrontation. I took a slow sip of my Pinot Noir. The truth was finally out in the open, brutal and undeniable. Sienna's perfect facade was shattering in real time, and she was the one holding the hammer. Sienna lunged forward, trying to snatch the bank statement out of Leo's hand. Give me that! You are humiliating me in front of my friends. You humiliated yourself, Leo shouted back, stepping away from her grasp. You told me the bachelorette trip was paid for by your parents. You put it on my credit line. You forged my signature to increase the limit. I watched the screen intently. I had not known about the forgery, but it made perfect sense. Sienna was ruthless when it came to maintaining her wealthy image, even if it meant committing financial fraud against her own fiancé. The efficient, a distinguished older man hired for a premium fee, tried to step between them, asking them to lower their voices. Sienna shoved him aside roughly. She pointed a manicured finger directly at Leo's chest. "You are nothing without me!" She shrieked, her voice cracking under the strain. "I only agreed to marry you because your mother had money. I thought she would sell that stupid house to fund our lifestyle. You are pathetic, Leo. You are completely broke, and now my wedding is ruined." A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the botanical garden. The sheer venom in her words stunned the crowd. She had just admitted in front of 300 elite guests that her entire relationship was a financial scheme targeting my personal assets. I set my wine glass down on the granite counter. I had always known Sienna was greedy, but hearing her explicitly admit she planned to force the sale of my home sent a cold chill down my spine. Thank God I had drawn the line and locked my doors when I did. Leo stared at her, the reality of the last 2 years finally washing over him. He had alienated his mother, taken on massive crippling debt, and sacrificed his self-respect for a woman who viewed him purely as a stepping stone. What happened next was captured from 6 different angles, and it changed their lives forever. Sienna did not stop. Furious that her financial plan was exposed to her social circle, she raised her bridal bouquet, a cheap bunch of grocery store flowers one of the bridesmaids had frantically bought, and hurled it directly into Leo's face. The plastic stem struck his cheek sharply. She stepped closer, raising her hand, screaming that he had ruined her life and destroyed her future. Leo snapped. The years of emotional manipulation, the massive financial betrayal, and the crushing public humiliation boiled over in a single second. Before Sienna could hit him, Leo's hand lashed out. The slap echoed sharply through the quiet botanical garden, picked up clearly by the officiant's microphone. Sienna's head snapped to the side. She stumbled backward, tripping over the heavy silk train of her custom wedding dress, and fell hard onto the manicured grass. The crowd erupted. Screams rang out from the front rows. Several groomsmen rushed forward, grabbing Leo by the shoulders and pulling him back away from the altar. Sienna sat on the ground, touching her bright red cheek, her face contorted in absolute shock. The live streams cut out wildly as phones were dropped or hurriedly moved, but the damage was already done. The footage was instantly saved, shared, and reposted. Within minutes, the clip of the pristine bride screaming about using her groom for money and getting slapped at the altar was circulating across every local news feed. I sat at my kitchen island, the house perfectly quiet around me. I felt no joy in watching my son resort to violence. It was a tragic, ugly end to a highly toxic relationship. But I did not feel responsible either. I had simply refused to be their financial cushion. I had handed my son his own mail. They had built their own house of cards, and I just stepped out of the way before it collapsed. I closed the application on my tablet, finished my wine, and washed my dishes. The wedding was officially over. By 9 o'clock that evening, my doorbell rang. I did not get up from my comfortable armchair. I opened the security application on my tablet and viewed the front porch camera. Leo was standing there. His tuxedo jacket was missing. His tie was completely undone, and he looked shattered. He pressed the doorbell again, leaning his forehead heavily against the solid wood. "Mom!" His voice cracked through the external speaker. "Please open the door. I have nowhere else to go." She kicked me out of the apartment. Her brothers threatened to hurt me. I pressed the microphone button on my tablet. My voice carried clearly through the porch speaker. "Leo, you cannot stay here." He flinched, looking up at the camera lens with bloodshot eyes. "Mom, please." "I am sorry. I am so sorry. I did not know about the debt. I did not know she was planning to go after your house. I lost everything today. You lost the illusion you chose to protect, I corrected him calmly. I warned you about her, and you chose to ban me from your wedding to appease her. You allowed her to treat me like garbage in my own home. I was stupid, he sobbed, wiping his face with the back of his hand. Just let me in. We can fix this together. No, Leo. You need to fix this, I said firmly. You need to call the bank on Monday morning. You need to deal with the credit card fraud. You need to figure out your own housing. I am not your safety net anymore. I did not yell. I was not angry. I was simply done fixing his life. I love you, Leo, I added softly, but you have to grow up. Good night. I turned off the microphone. He stood there on the porch for another 5 minutes before finally turning around and walking slowly out into the dark suburban street. The fallout from the disastrous wedding was spectacular and entirely out of my hands. The video of the slap went viral, picked up by local news stations as a bizarre wedding fail story. Sienna's reputation in her elite social circles was completely obliterated. People do not easily forgive a bride who explicitly screams about using someone for their money. Leo did not go to jail. Sienna did not want the police investigating her fraudulent credit card applications, so no charges were filed. However, he did have to declare bankruptcy to untangle himself from the massive debt she had secretly accumulated in his name. He rented a small room across town and took a second job to survive. He texted me a few weeks later, apologizing again for everything. I replied telling him I wished him well and that we could get a coffee when he had his life fully sorted out. A boundary is not a real boundary if you instantly fold the moment someone cries. I did not step in to pay his legal fees, and I did not offer him a room in my house. I maintained my peace. I spent my mornings tending to my garden and my evenings enjoying a glass of wine on the patio. I redecorated the guest room that Sienna had always sneered at, turning it into a beautiful sunlit reading room for myself. I realized that for years I had been holding my breath, waiting for my son to appreciate my sacrifices. But you cannot buy respect, and you certainly cannot force someone to value you by handing them your money. I am Irene Caldwell. I am not low class, and I am not a victim. I simply stepped out of the crossfire, locked my doors, and let the truth do all the heavy lifting. And my life has never been more peaceful. Have you ever had to draw a hard line with your family? Let me know in the comments.